Well, my name's Kevin Watson. I'm the publisher and editor-in-chief of Press 53 in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And if everyone would mute themselves, that would be a big help. We want to make sure that there's no interference with the reading tonight. And sometimes if you make the slightest noise at all, it will interrupt the reading. So go ahead and mute yourselves and stay muted. At some point later, we're going to open the mics and have a discussion so people can ask questions. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat section. Tom Lombardo, who I'm going to introduce in just a second, is our poetry series editor who brought Cheryl Wilder to Press 53. He and I will be interspersing the reading with some questions of our own, and I'll keep an eye on the chat section. So if you've got a question, I may throw that out there as well. But if I don't get your question at the end of this, feel free to do so. We're going to leave about 15 minutes at the end for folks to ask questions and to wish Cheryl the best. We love her book. We love the cover art, especially, is just phenomenal. I was knocked out by that. So thank you, Cheryl. That saved me many hours. So anyway, if you're not familiar with Press 53, we are a small press in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. We publish poetry and short fiction collections only. I love short fiction and poetry. And that's how I wanted to spend my time, was to find writing that I loved and to share it with the world and to find people who agreed with me. And then in 2009, I think it was late January 2009, Tom Lombardo came on board after we worked together on an anthology that Tom put together called Aftershocks. And I invited him to join Press 53 as a poetry series editor. So he's been with us for 12 years now, building a really nice catalog of wonderful poetry, of which Cheryl's is part of that. So I'm going to introduce Tom Lombardo. But first I want to invite you all to visit the Press 53 website, press53.com. and have a look around. We pride ourselves in publishing more women than men, which is not by any design. We didn't set out to do that. We just realized that as we were going along, that the women really took us places we'd never been before. And it opened experiences to us that were new and exciting. And so therefore about 60% of the writers we publish are women. And we're proud of that, because in this industry, there's kind of a stigma that the men get the spotlight and the women don't. And we're just looking for great voices. We're not looking for marketability or what we think people want to read or anything like that. We're finding voices that resonate with us. And turns out the women have an edge over the guys. Sorry, guys, but that's the way it is with us anyway. So anyway, I hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you for being here. It means a lot to me. I'm going to turn this over to Tom Lombardo. He's our poetry series editor who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. He's a graduate of the Queen's University MFA program in Charlotte. We've published several folks from that program. It's a great MFA program. And Tom is now has his PhD, or is working toward his PhD in Georgia. So Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you introduce Cheryl.
Do we remember that Cheryl was born in Roseville, California, which is a suburb of Sacramento? She moved to North Carolina as a, quote, lost kid, end quote, as she described it to me. And she made that move in the early 1990s. And events here in North Carolina changed her life. At the age of 20, Cheryl got behind the wheel when she was too drunk to drive. Her friend in the passenger seat ended up in a coma. Anything That Happens, which is her collection, follows Wilder's journey from a young adult consumed by shame to a woman learning to remake herself. I first heard Cheryl read a few of these poems at an open mic at the now defunct Bright Leaf bookstore on 5th Street in Winston-Salem, for those of you who are there. Her poems were powerful, and I think you'll be as blown away by her story as I was then, and I still am. So Cheryl, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can lead into maybe the first couple of poems from that collection.
I will. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Kevin, for helping make this book possible, for putting on this event for me. And thank you to all of the people here tonight. My heart is like jumping out of my chest. So I'm going to start off with the title poem titled Anything That Happens. Until I was 20, I believed anything wouldn't happen to me. Walking from the car, leaving you behind, sirens whining louder as they closed on us. I didn't understand anything had just happened. People said it wasn't my fault. And for reassurance, it could have been me. But I heard what they didn't say. I'm so glad it wasn't. I want to say before I go on is, as you already know, when I was 20 years old, I made a very grave mistake. The guilt I felt afterward turned into a deep, ever-present shame. And I still had to learn how to be an adult in the world. So this collection explores relationships while living with shame. There's the relationship I had to rebuild with myself, the relationship I had with my parents, with becoming a mother, and also my relationship with shame. So this next poem I'm going to read in the book, it's three. It's a series of poems. They're all called Slipped 1, 2, and 3. It works really well to break them up in the collection, but for the sake of reading, I'm going to read them together. And what I'll do is there'll be a longer pause in between the 3 poems so that you'll know we're switching a little bit, just a little bit. Slipped. We drank and danced in dive bars. As we walked to the car, humidity glistened toxic, and you threw me the keys. I threw them back. You threw them to me, those rigid teeth in between my fingers. You slipped in the passenger seat, and I took the wheel. I took the wheel, and you put on California Dreamin'. We sang. I swayed my shoulders, and you shimmied your feet to the pop harmony until the rain-slick curve took the car, took the wheel, and we slipped until laughter was slapped from our bodies. Air entered and left my nose. Opening my eyes, I recognized the steering wheel, the dashboard, my hands, my legs, the quiet stereo, and draped over the center console, a limp body. Curly hair bunched around a collared button-up, still sweaty from dancing. I held my breath, leaned close to the side of your face, closed my eyes as if I could disappear, pleaded with wet words as tears dripped onto my tongue. Get up, get out of the car. Please get up, please wake up. your current of breath my only answer. I wanted to run, I had to get help. I entered the June air and froze under yellow streetlights that beat on and off. I stood in the middle of the street, the car wrapped around a pole, you still inside. I heard sirens grow close, thought of my sheets, how cool they are in the humid, hot summer, and wanted to lie down between them as I lost the last moment of a person that was me. I was taken from the scene. You were lifted carefully, I'm sure. They checked my breath, gave me an orange jumpsuit, bustled around my purpose, my meaning, and I didn't mean to. I didn't. But what does that change? I wouldn't struggle against handcuffs. Never challenged the paperwork process. Could only hear blood curdling in the background. The next poem I'm going to read is called Bailed Out. I was pretty lucky at the time, even though I'd only been in North Carolina for 8 or 9 months, that I had some good friends to bail me out. The house stirs with my stirring. I am the elephant, the devil's minion. Secure in my arms a woven Afghan, blue and darker blue. I run fingers through holes and open like a wishbone, but cannot pull them apart. A wish not wished establishes habit, like sleep dancing or tangling the vacuum cord around my wrist to make love. I am two people now, the before and the after. One I've already forgotten. The other I have not met. I hear voices whisper, what if? A crossroads so difficult to leave, I build a roadside bench. At some point, I will rise from this bed, speak though I only hear his curdled breath, allow my first taste of bone in the broth I can smell, but no one will notice my stained hands, the bloody prints on the wall. Autopilot. Iron creases in polo shirts and khaki pants. Tie shoelaces. Charm customers and wipe clean the top rim of crusty ketchup bottles. To be 20 is to not believe in death. Reflected in coworkers' eyes, I see the scythe I carry, the way they glance in my direction, and in their walk, the way it takes them away from me. I don't know how to grieve for a tragedy I have caused. Every streak left after washing a window means something larger than my intent. The word accident gives others closure. So I believe no one sees me vanish after the judge postpones my sentencing, to wait for our friend to wake up or die.
Hey, Cheryl, I've got a question for you, if you don't
Yeah,
mind.
not at all.
How long after this accident and going through all this were you able to put the pen to paper, so to speak, and really think about this and work through it using poetry?
It was about 10 years that I started seriously working on it. Up until then, it was a lot of pages and pages of why? So it was really just a diatribe of whys. And then it wasn't until I went to school. Did my undergraduate. I got my BFA in writing at UNC Wilmington. And I actually first wrote the story in a short story class. I wrote of the scene of the night as fiction. That was my first attempt because I couldn't bear to get any closer to that. So it started as a piece of fiction, which was awful. And so that was my first, and actually, so I graduated from UNCW in 2005, December 2005. And the very last poem I submitted for my very last workshop that I had with Michael White was actually part of for the slipped poems come from that poem. And so I went through school with all these other writers for 2.5 years, and they all knew my work and they knew nothing about this story. And then at the last day, there's this poem and they're just like, what are you doing? You know, because I couldn't, I don't know. I just didn't want to live in a world, I guess, still where I had to keep talking about it. So I was like, okay, now I'm out. I'm going to graduate and go leave for a while. So, yeah, so 10 to 12 years. And then I really started doing the really hard work when I went to graduate school at Vermont College of Fine Arts. And I started that in 2008. So. And then
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
What else do you have for us next?
Well, I think I'm gonna take a little side trip. So I kind of like these couple of poems that introduce, a younger me possibly, or, the whole trying to figure out who you are in the world through your parents and stuff. So this first poem is called Hit Me. I stand across the street in our neighbor's yard with their teenage son, who encourages me to hit him anywhere. I'm younger than 7 and curl my fingers into palms that one day read, I will learn early from tragedy. It's not like flipping someone off our teeter-totter or holding the snake Dad found in the yard. It's small fists on a summer day, learning to draw their first blood. This other poem is called Wild Animal. My father reared me unbridled. At first bleed, males smelled the heat, circled close, knew I expected only leaving. It must have been the tether of nurture that made him stray to evenly cut bent grass, where pollinators can't survive. I plant phlox, milkweed, coneflower, drag my suckling childhood into the nearest cave, and lick the wounds of generations. So I think from there, so I kind of want to read this one next. And it was great to actually work on this poem because it had a completely different title. The poem didn't change. And Tom was like, I'm not quite sure what you're trying to tell me here. And this is the great thing about poetry, because I didn't want to change the poem at all. And so I just changed the title and voila. It's called Reaching Out. And I would say that this one is definitely one that touches on that shame. And I know many people that have had problems just asking for help. Reaching out. It's as simple as picking up a rock and seeing how far you can throw it. The sunlight breaks, swallowing the stone whole as it sinks to the bottom of the river. I can't remember the last time I threw anything. And I mean throwing with the meat of the shoulder, the push and release of the hand, as if someone wants to catch. For me, that transitions well into this next one. No one will ever love you. He tells me in bed. I'm looking for safety, however insecure. No one will ever love. My wounds fold into armor until I go numb to his voice. No one will ever. I don't cheat at solitaire because I am not someone to control. No one will. I am chicken and dumplings made by my mother, who took shit from no one. His words become fluff like the pillow we once lay upon before I learned to say no. So maybe something a little happier. To pregnancy, because you know, it's a long life and there's lots of, it's complicated, right? So to pregnancy. I cherish the way cotton makes me shimmer as I pull a camisole across my belly stretched to its apex. How I smell an apple's earthy core, damp and early morning hunger before I cut the first slice. The medial ache that turns a day into multiple little days. Wake and sleep, wake and sleep, wake and sleep. My body rotates as if orbiting space, sated by you holding me, secure to the mattress. To say that a child can change your life as well is obviously stating the obvious. But I got pregnant at 23, unplanned, and frightened still, of course. And obviously the best thing that happened to me in my early 20s. So we kind of grew up together, he and I. So this next one, the great metamorphosis. Pressure grows from my belly, like the spark of a match becomes a raging forest fire. His head emerges, burns, road rash throbbing, brazen cries. Then I wait for another contraction to push his body through, and the strange, dangly feeling between my legs makes me wonder if this is how it feels to have a penis. There's your smile for the day. This next poem is titled Crossing, and the title is actually spelled X-I-N-G, like you would see on a pedestrian crossing sign or a railroad crossing sign. So, crossing. I don't know how I brought a child into the world when I can't reconcile if crashing a car and a friend's skull is karmic debt created or payment for a past immoral act. I open doors and say thank you and do not try to behave in a way I cannot afford. There's no barometer, no way to know if the pendulum is swinging away or toward, how many pay it forwards it takes before I break even at the gambling table. I could blend in with the pure if it weren't for the scars that don't fade, no matter how many turtles I save. So am I all that surprised when my little boy tells me of his palpable fear to cross the street? This next poem is titled Inheritance. I began by believing I deserved small pleasures, like a husband who didn't spit on me. But little gestures matured in my toddler, who strummed his fingers across his father's guitar, the too large hat swallowing his head. The same child who screamed after I wouldn't buy him candy in the checkout line. Fucking bitch, stop the goddamn car. His first curse words, all grown up, kicking and red-faced in his car seat. I didn't stop driving from Walmart on a weekday afternoon after learning it wasn't just me who deserved more. One of the things that I thought a lot about was the idea of worth, of our self-worth, and how the word is tied to how we value like money and property. I mean, it's so tied to our capitalistic society, this worth, and how that's actually also tied to how we're supposed to feel about ourselves. So the word worth was one of the ones I explored a lot for many years, and in this book. So here's a poem that came out of that. For what it's worth. I don't have to look in the mirror to know my eyes aren't brown, but sullied. To see different is to defy earning them. There is no end to the price of crashing. A car into a pole, a friend's skull into a windshield, my longing to reach for a hand. I eat with jagged spoons, tear open my mouth to fit bricks made of minds drowning in blood. What is left but a future where I am not worth saving?
Hey, Cheryl,
Yeah,
could I ask you to read a poem?
of course.
The Toss.
Which one?
The Toss.
Yes. Yeah. The toss. I try to switch places, wake up as if I spent 4 months in a coma to find my words stuck in between my mind and mouth, fractured and taut with dryness. But I won the toss of the keys, and I rounded the corners, slid through the stop signs, then awoke in the car, the only one able to choke silence into words. I'm gonna back up a little bit to introduce my mother. So as you remember, I was 3,000 miles or so away from home. I'd been gone about 9 months. Call home. The phone is next to my head, and I don't want to pick it up. Home isn't good on the phone. It taught me to rely on no one, so when it answers, there is no longing sparked by being away from it. This time, I need Mom to say she's on the next plane without being asked. but we're in limbo. I don't know how to say, I need you. She doesn't know. She is the consolation I want. It was interesting after, all the crash and, all the shame, all the not knowing how to trust the biggest part was I didn't feel like I was a trustworthy person. How could I have a friend, because obviously I hurt a friend, or, so I was wrought with this, not trusting myself, but more so not allowing other people probably to get close because I didn't feel like they should trust me. And then as it happens, my mother moved 3,000 miles to be close to me and my family, and then ended up having stage 4 cancer. So I ended up being her caregiver, and it was a very interesting, I had already done a lot of the work that I needed to do to get through a lot of my shame, but it was also interesting to care for her in a way that I also never felt that I was cared for. I know my mom cared for me, but she didn't like to take care. She wasn't a caregiver. She didn't like hospitals. She didn't like sick people. She didn't like any of that. So she was always on the periphery. So it was a very interesting shift. So this one is titled As Mothers Do. Caring for you is as painful as childbirth, as lonely as the few hours afterward when I was no longer the central figure, but an afterthought. I'm slumped in a chair as you stare not at the ceiling, but through it. The oncologist lures our attention with prognosis and complications of your care. I listen to your options. Watch the doctor glide from talking to you to addressing me. Then I see you out of the corner of my eye, shift in the bed, and settle into your new position, looking toward me, away from yourself, as mothers do.
Cheryl, could I ask another question? Oh, sorry,
yeah,
go
please.
ahead.
No. Ask
okay.
away.
Who would you say your influences are? Professors or poets? I mean, you got your BFA at Wilmington, and then you got an MFA in Vermont. Did you run into, say, Major Jackson up there?
Oh yeah, I worked with Rick Jackson. Huge influence on my work. Mark Cox is another one. Nancy Eimers is another one. All of my mentors at that time were so thoughtful and influential and engaged, and I loved their work. The one poet that I connect with that is like my guru of a poet is Gregory Orr. He was the first, when I read his poetry, I didn't even know his story, but the way that he wrote, there was something about it that I connected with like I never had before. And there was this existential bent that he had that I had at such a young age, because meaning was literally like wiped. I was 20, I had nothing. I didn't have anything to grab onto. And he was grappling with the same things in his poems. Come to find out, he had suffered an early tragedy as well, and where he was not at fault, but he was, well, I'll just tell you, when he was 12, he went on his first hunting ritual with all the guys, his dad, brothers, and everything. First time he ever had a gun in his hand. They were standing there, the gun went off, and his little brother dropped to the ground. And the gun was in Gregory Orr's hand, and his brother died because it accidentally went off in his hand. And so since the age of 12, he was obviously existentially tortured. So it made sense once I heard his story why I connected with him, because he's yearning for something that I was yearning for. So he is the most influential poet that I know. My teachers were influential because their work is amazing and their feedback is amazing. We're influential as well. But as someone I never met and whose work I identify with, it would be Gregory Orr. I'd highly recommend him. Where was I? Oh, so this one's called The Unfairy Tale. There is no tower for my hair to cascade, only night shifts and a bungalow where I arrive with dark circles and a fifth in my purse, greasy with fry oil and behind on rent. So what do I say after I pull my son's baby tooth? I raise him to believe in happiness, yet I want him to know happily ever after isn't waiting for someone to save you. On my way back to work, I rely on the story that I know and tell him a fairy will leave money if he sleeps with his tooth under a pillow, or I won't remember to place a few quarters when I return home. How are we on time? Okay, so I'm gonna read just a couple of more. So let me go back here. All right. Now I'm going back to the courtroom when I was being sentenced. He called me the devil. When he spoke about the devil, he didn't face me. He stood tall and soft as his slender hands gestured toward the judge. Man to man, his confidence closed distance between himself and the bench. The devil corrupted his son. My eyes fell to the floor, rolled up the wall, out the window, and onto a slither of clouds. Lawyers debated punishment, not knowing penance began after I opened my eyes in the car, when the devil realized she could breathe. I think I'll read two more and then we'll be at our time. This one's called Weekends. So to fill in the blank, I was sentenced to 2 years in prison. And on appeal, I got 2 weeks and 4 years probation. So, and probation basically meaning that if I were to do anything wrong, they would have given me the 2-year sentence. So, and I did my 14 days during weekends. So. Weekends. 7 times I check in and take off my clothes for officers wearing white, sterile gloves. They lift my breasts, shake out my hair, bend me over to see if I am hiding something. I wear 7 orange jumpsuits and watch 14 days go by in meals, med carts, and mail. To honor time served, I had earrings made from a gold pendant I never wore. The jeweler cast 2 small angels. 1 earring he left alone. The second he carved from the angel's body. Never before had he made a devil, pitchfork and all. Home safe. Friends visit the hospital where I am not wanted. It's just as well that I stay in bed, carve poplar into a shield I can place between myself and others. Learn you wake from a coma by the drop of my manslaughter charge. Years pass before I hear your voice again, asking me to lunch over the phone. Your mother, telling me I am only allowed in her home because you found my number on your own. You reach for my arm to steady your walk. Lean close to see me in focus. Your smile wide on one side of your face, brightened even more at the restaurant when you flirt with the waiter. That is enough to see a glimpse of the friend I once knew. But then you reach across the table for my hands, look at me to say what you defied your mother to say. It's not your fault. Over and again, I forgive you. You can't remember the night I cannot forget, but you know your words are my salvation. There is no talk of next time. You get out of the car and walk into the house, back to your mother, who can breathe once again. Thank you.
Cheryl, thank you so much for that.
Can I start off with a question here?
Sure,
Yeah.
go ahead, Tom.
I noticed one that Serena Augusto Cox asked, and I want to make sure we don't miss it. How long does it take you to organize a collection of poems?
It's a good
Was
question.
this process vastly different from your other projects?
That's a great question.
From Serena.
It's for this project, I don't know if it's longer than others, but I had tried to bury this story. So the first time I created a collection was in graduate school. You have to have a creative thesis, like a manuscript. And it was like 1/3 of it. It was thread with these other stories. And I eventually knew that was not correct. And then it's even, so it's kind of hard because a lot of time lapsed, but there's family and stuff. So it probably took me, I would say, like a half dozen good revisions, like when I was revising, to find the order. Probably even more, like there was probably little things, but like big overhaul revisions, because even like April of last year, I was going to give Tom the final draft by July. And in April, I took out 11 poems of the book. And that's substantial when you only have 60 poems. Because at that point, I still, they weren't working. Tom's like, that's not working. Like these poems, they weren't as strong. And I was still using third person. And I wrote 11 new poems. And that finally gave me the order. But it was all it took me a while because I had to chip away to get to the heart to be okay to say the things that I really wanted to say. So that's probably not a clear enough answer because this one was so long, but at least 6 hard revisions to get to where I wanted to get to the arc. It wasn't always in an arc as it is right now, but lots of years in between those revisions.
Wow. I know you worked with Tom quite a while on this, and I know he enjoyed the process.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for
Mm-hmm.
bringing it to Press 53. Thank you for trusting us with your words. I want to invite everyone to unmute themselves and give Cheryl a little cheer, round of applause, whatever, and then we'll take some questions from you. So.
Great job.
Hey, Cheryl.
Thank you.
I admire your courage. Yes. Anyone have a question?
There's a question. I think there's a question in the chat that's a really good question about how you selected which poems that sort of created the arc for you.
Which poems created the arc?
Yeah, sort of which were the key poems and how did you figure that out?
I would say the key poems were the crash poems. You know, I mean, they've, you know, when I put them in order, I didn't know how to tell the story or how to get people into the story without it being in order, the crash poems. Because it felt like, how could you read about being bailed out before knowing what actually happened, right? Or how could you read about the home safe would not make sense in the middle, right? Because that's a really good ending to the chapter of my life, of, you know, that situation, but also to the collection. So the crash poems they frame the whole book. So if anyone who hasn't read it, you start with that heavy, you kind of go into other threads in the middle with family and, you know, just trying to figure shame out, all that stuff. And then you I peppered in the crash. Also because it's ever present, like no matter what I do, no matter how happy I am. I mean, it's not like I'm suffering every day anymore, but it's, as anybody knows, when you have a trauma, it's just a part of your life. You've learned how to live with it. And so that arc, it framed the arc in that way. And then through that, it was easy to put the birth of my son earlier, obviously, because that's, you know, a new thing. And then, and it did happen logically that way. And my mother, caring for her was later. No, it was much later. It's not, the timeline is a little skewed, but poetry allows those things too. So that's lovely. But so, yeah, so that's kind of how I did it. And then my dad, he's been gone from my life since I was 18. So he just kind of shows up, you know, periodically, because he doesn't really have his own arc, really. His absence is his arc. But yeah, that's what I did.
Hey, Cheryl, this is Chris.
Hi, Chris.
Hi, my question is, well, this made me think about an accident I was in. The driver fell asleep and I was in college, and we went 60 miles an hour into a parked car on the side of a highway, which was strange because it was just a long stretch of road and this car happened to be there. No one died. I just came out with whiplash, but this kind of brings back all those that memory for me that I survived just because I had a seatbelt on primarily. So how therapeutic was it to write this? Like, when did you decide I'm going to put a book together on this topic? And how therapeutic was it to write this? And how did that tie into how did you kind of mesh the art of writing poetry into therapy?
I was thinking about this. I'm doing a blog book tour, and one of the interview questions was like, how have you grown, like, as a writer? And I realized that I've grown as a writer as I've grown as a person, especially because this happened when I was 20, when I was just learning how to be an adult. So it's like my arc is very similar to being a writer. I honestly wrote, so there was a point after graduate school, I went to graduate school for poetry, and 6 months later, I couldn't write a single poem. I was literally couldn't write a single poem. All I could think about was sentences, which I'd never think in sentences, which I might seem some weird to some people. Poets will understand that. You think in images, you think in short spurts. I didn't think in sentences. And I got to the point where all I could do was think in sentences. And I was like, I just spent how much money on poetry and now I can't do it anymore. I sat down after a month of being really frustrated and I wrote out the scene of the night, and I wrote 20 pages of prose. I cried. I thought I was destined to write a memoir, and I was so sad because I didn't want to write a memoir. I didn't want to do it. I wrote 240 pages eventually of prose. So talk about the therapy, Chris. So I didn't want to put my therapy in the poems. I wanted my poems to be after the therapy, right? So I didn't realize at the time I thought I was writing a book, like a nonfiction book. So I wrote 240 pages of prose, and I got to the end of that, took a break, didn't know what I was doing. And then I was like, I want to go back to my love. Like I'm a poet. I don't want to write a memoir. And so I actually took a lot of that and made it into the book as well. So I think I needed to do that writing to get to the other side of I needed to figure out how to get to some other side of myself that I hadn't gotten to yet. And so it was a lot of extra writing that got me here. 3 months of some therapy, actually, during the time. And then I didn't know it was ever going to be a full collection. Like I was saying earlier, it was always a thread of some other story, but that was hiding. And I got to the point where I realized that I just had to be okay with my story. Like I've never been okay with it. It's some part of my life I've never been okay with, but I had to become okay with it. And so once I could do that, then I just allowed, that actually was just last April. That's when I took out those 11 poems, is when I said, okay, story, here you are, do what you want with me. And I dug deeper. Instead of going away from what I already had, I dug deeper for those 11 poems. And and so that was kind of the end of that therapy part of seeing, because so yeah. So I don't know if that answered your question, but it took a long time, but a lot of extra writing. That's all. I mean, that was the biggest piece. So.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
I don't have so much of a question because I'm really close to Cheryl. I have a whole different perspective reading her poetry. First, I just have always known the writer in her since we met in 6th grade and had such a wonderful teacher that I remember our writing circle. But it's so emotional for me to read her poetry after the fact, as she was only 20 and left California, but she was so alone, and I didn't know till after the fact. She didn't reach out, and I always wish I could have been there for her. So it's really deep to read her words now, but also just in the poetry, it's so deep, and I'm so proud of your writing, and just to hear like her mother didn't take any shit. I will attest to that. I know the characters, and I wish so bad I could reach back in time and have been there, because I feel your pain, and she's such an amazing person. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in, because I've asked her all the questions that I have. Anyway, you're so wonderful.
Thank you, Colleen.
Yeah.
Thank you. I was looking at these couple of questions that I kind of touched on, but am I happy with the product, or will I work on it? It kind of goes with, was the revision process cathartic, which I have touched on, but I think even more so when I think about the cathartic part of revision, that is probably where some of my deepest work goes. Like when you're writing a poem, you're finding the exact word, and to find the exact word so that I can portray my feeling to you, so that you can feel my shame or my love, or I have to find the perfect word, right? And so doing that work, it's like, how do I feel? Like, well, what is that? That is cathartic. Like, that's why I think, like I know they do a lot of writing in therapies and stuff, but it's true, like mulling over, I ask myself, how does this make me feel? Why do I feel this? How do I do this over and over and over? Is this the right word? Does this image portray the deep, emptiness that I feel? Like, how do I do that? And so, yes, it's very cathartic to revise on that level. And then Aqua asked if I'm happy. I am very happy with it. Actually, I never thought I could say that because I never thought I was allowed to be happy because of this, and especially be happy talking about it. Like I never thought that should exist a long time ago. So I'm happy in a lot of levels that are hard to explain at the moment. So I won't rework this. There'll be other things that'll be different, but I won't rework this either. Those are the other 2 things that I saw. You got your hand up, Aqua. You're so sweet. I don't know how to do that. I don't know. Kevin will have to do that part.
Hi, Cheryl.
Hi,
Cheryl. I love you. I adore you. Now, seeing as I've known you for a long time, like Colleen, and I remember when this happened, I would like to know that as you went through the process, and you know, you're 40 something now, have you forgiven?
Just kidding.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding.
Have you forgiven that 20-year-old girl that got in the car and made a mistake because that was just a mistake? And have you forgiven her as you went through this process? And was this a very healing one for you?
Yes. Yes, I have forgiven her. That was the hardest piece, I would say, for myself. Because to forgive, it means you have to deal with the shame, right? So I can't forgive myself if I don't let go of it a little bit. So yes, and that was really what I set out to do from the beginning. Like, it took me a while to get to a point where I was like, okay, I got to do this work. I decided I wasn't going to run away from it. Then I decided I wasn't just going to kind of mask it and just go through life with, and be like, oh no, it's here, whatever, it's fine. I decided I was just going to dive into it. And so I basically spent my 20s learning how to forgive myself, learning what forgiveness was, learning what makes a good life, a full life. I mean, all these questions. And so forgiving myself was the first thing that I had to do. And not that it was just like, oh, I'm one and done and I go out, right? It's a process of forgiveness. But I have forgiven myself for it.
And now I have a next part to that too, because since I have known you for a long time and have in your process, right? I remember your mom and she did not take any shit. And I remember stories of your dad and different stories that I may or may not know what they were through your youth. But have you come to the realization that you didn't deserve to be hurt, that you're worthy and that you deserved more in life, and that you deserve love and to be loved? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it did.
Okay.
It does. Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I was lucky in the fact that my childhood that I wasn't hurt. I wasn't, physically hurt or sexually hurt or any of those things. I was just, I don't think my parents really wanted kids. Like, just kind of didn't act like they really wanted kids. And obviously my dad left, so he definitely didn't want kids. And that was hard, but with the forgiveness, I mean, it was also getting angry at them, and then having to forgive them for being imperfect, and knowing that my mom did the best that she could, given the fact that she wouldn't deal with her own demons. And I knew that my mom loved me, there's no doubt about that. But yeah, no, I have love in my life now. I'm a very happy person. I have a lot of love in my life. And so that came part of it. I had forgive myself, and forgiving myself allowed me to feel that I could be loved, right? And I could actually love somebody else. So that was one of the next steps after. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your stories with us. They made me cry. It was very touching. And I really, really adore you.
Thank you, Aqua.
So.
Cheryl, here's another question from the chat.
Yeah.
Where does the shame now live or hide for you?
Now live or hide or fade or die. Well, I can say that part of that shame lives right here. For me, I'm a kinesthetic person and a visual learner. And I've talked about this before with friends and family. Like my process, one of the things I love about writing is that I feel like I can take what I can't see going on in here, and then I can see it, and it becomes a manageable thing. And I'm like, oh, I don't have to carry this weight anymore because my piece of paper is carrying this weight for me. Like, I know if I want to feel the shame, I know where to go now. I've got a resource. So that is part of my process too, is like this writing helps me put down the load of life and just gives me a breather so I can work it and make it part of my life so I can deal with it. So it's here, definitely in the book. Where does it live within me? I think I'd really, I'm happy to say that it doesn't rear up with me as like anymore. Like, not, I don't know, it's weird. Talking, like I was so nervous tonight, but that's because I've never talked about this publicly before. And even people that have known me for so long, they're like, I didn't know all this, So, but I'm not ashamed to talk about it. So it's not creeping up right now. It's just more like, wow, I can't believe I'm doing this. But so yeah, it lives in the paper. I don't know, it may pop back up, but luckily I don't have to live with it every day anymore. And that's lovely.
Well, Cheryl, thank you so much for sharing your story with us tonight and for bringing this collection to Press 53. And thank you, Tom, for working with Cheryl on it. I've read the collection a couple of times, and every time a new layer opens up for me. It's interesting how I discover new things every time. But I admire your courage. I'm glad to see that you're moving on with your life. Forgiving that 20-year-old young woman. We've all been there. We've all been 20 and felt invulnerable. And you learn the hard way. So I want to thank you for sharing this with us. And I have a link in the chat if you want to buy Cheryl's book. We've got it there. We're all out of signed copies. I'm sorry to say we've sold them all. But if you know Cheryl, she may, if you run into her, I'm sure she'd be happy to sign it for you.
Of course, of course. Hey.
Yeah. And thank you all for coming out tonight.
Yeah.
I really do appreciate it.
And
appreciate all the support.
And thank you. I'm reading the chats. I can't type fast enough. I'm not very good at that. So thank you for all being here, for all of these lovely words that you're putting over here. If you didn't get a question asked, I'm happy to answer them. You can email me. I don't know. So
I'll send you a copy of the chat so you can take a look and
thank you.
Answer someone.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes.
All right.
Very much.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. And Cheryl, thank you again. I can't thank you enough for trusting us with this collection. It really is amazing.
Thank you. You and Tom are amazing. I'm happy to be part of the Press 53 family. It's an honor. So thank you so much for everything, for supporting me and my book, my story.
It's returned tenfold. So good night, everyone. Good night, Cheryl.
Good night.
Get some good sleep. You earned it. Love you all.